The morning sun painted the Nevada sky in shades of orange and gold as Captain Jake Morrison suited up for what he thought would be a routine training exercise. The briefing had been simple enough: intercept an unknown aircraft that had entered restricted airspace near Nellis Air Force Base. Standard procedure, nothing he hadn't done dozens of times before. Jake had been flying F-22 Raptors for 3 years now, and he took pride in his perfect record. Not once had an intruder managed to slip past him or his wingman during their patrols. Today would be no different, he assured himself as he climbed into the cockpit of his stealth fighter. Viper 1, this is Tower. You're cleared for takeoff. Unknown contact bearing 270, Angels 20. Proceed with caution and establish visual contact, came the crisp voice through his headset. Copy, Tower. Viper 1 rolling, Jake responded, pushing the throttles forward. The massive engines of the F-22 roared to life, and within seconds he was airborne, climbing rapidly toward the coordinates. His wingman, Captain Sarah Chen, called sign Viper 2, pulled alongside him in perfect formation. They had flown together for over a year and had developed an almost telepathic understanding in the air. Sarah was one of the best pilots Jake had ever worked with, sharp as a tack and completely fearless. Tower, Viper flight is airborne and heading to intercept, Sarah radioed. ETA to contact in 12 minutes. As they climbed through the crystal-clear morning air, Jake felt the familiar rush of adrenaline that came with every flight. The F-22 was the most advanced fighter jet in the world, a technological marvel that could outfly anything in the sky. Its stealth capabilities made it nearly invisible to radar, while its speed and maneuverability were unmatched. Flying one was like being at the controls of a spacecraft. Viper 1, I'm picking up something strange on my scope, Sarah's voice crackled through the radio. The bogey's signature is unusual. Jake glanced at his own radar display and frowned. The contact was there, but it was faint, almost ghost-like. Whatever aircraft they were chasing had some serious stealth technology of its own. That was unusual for civilian aircraft, and it immediately put Jake on high alert. Tower, Viper flight. Can you confirm the type of aircraft we're pursuing? Jake asked. There was a pause before the response came. Negative, Viper flight. Aircraft type unknown. Proceed with standard intercept protocols. Jake found that answer unsettling. Nellis was one of the most secure airspace areas in the country, home to some of the military's most classified programs. For an unknown aircraft to penetrate this far without being identified was highly irregular. As they approached the contact's last known position, Jake began scanning the sky visually. The F-22's sophisticated sensors could detect targets at incredible ranges, but sometimes the human eye could spot things that technology missed. The morning sun was climbing higher, creating perfect visibility conditions. There, Sarah called out. 2 o'clock low, about 5 miles out. Jake turned his head and immediately spotted it, a sleek, dark aircraft that seemed to glide through the air with an almost supernatural grace. Even at this distance, he could tell it was unlike anything he had seen before. It wasn't a civilian plane, that was certain. The design was too angular, too purposeful, but it didn't match any known military aircraft either. Tower. Viper flight has visual contact with unknown aircraft. Attempting radio contact, Jake transmitted. Unknown aircraft. This is United States Air Force F-22. You are in violation of restricted airspace. Identify yourself immediately and follow my lead to Nellis Air Force Base for landing, Jake broadcast on the emergency frequency. Silence. Jake tried again, this time with more authority in his voice. Unknown aircraft. You are ordered to respond immediately. Failure to comply will result in defensive action. Still nothing. Jake and Sarah moved into a standard intercept formation, positioning themselves on either side of the mysterious aircraft. As they drew closer, Jake got his first clear look at the intruder, and what he saw made his blood run cold. The aircraft was definitely military in design, with sharp angular lines that spoke of stealth technology. But it wasn't American, at least not any American aircraft he had ever seen or heard of. The paint scheme was a deep, matte black that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. There were no visible markings, no national insignia, nothing to identify its origin. But what really caught Jake's attention was the way it flew. The pilot was good, better than good. As Jake and Sarah moved to bracket the aircraft, the pilot began a series of maneuvers that demonstrated an intimate knowledge of air combat tactics. Every move was precise, calculated, designed to maintain the best possible defensive position. "This guy knows what he's doing," Sarah observed, echoing Jake's thoughts. "Tower, requesting permission to fire warning shots," Jake radioed. The situation was escalating beyond a simple intercept. "Negative Viper flight. Continue attempts at radio contact. Use minimum force necessary." Jake gritted his teeth in frustration. The rules of engagement were clear, but they were dealing with an obviously military aircraft of unknown origin. This could be a test of American defenses, or worse, an actual hostile incursion. As if reading his thoughts, the unknown aircraft suddenly banked hard to the left and dove toward the desert floor below. The maneuver was so sudden and aggressive that it caught both Jake and Sarah off guard. "He's running!" Sarah exclaimed. "Not on my watch," Jake replied, rolling his F-22 into a steep dive to follow. The chase was on. The mysterious aircraft dove toward the jagged peaks and deep canyons of the Nevada desert, using the terrain to try to break visual contact. But Jake and Sarah were experienced pilots, and their F-22s were built for exactly this kind of pursuit. What followed was an aerial ballet of incredible skill and precision. The unknown pilot led them through a series of canyons at speeds that would have been suicidal for a less experienced aviator. The aircraft pulled G-forces that should have been impossible for a human pilot to withstand, yet it continued to fly with mechanical precision. Jake found himself grudgingly admiring the skill of whoever was at the controls. This wasn't some amateur who had stumbled into restricted airspace. This was a pilot of exceptional ability, flying an aircraft that was clearly designed for combat. But as impressive as the unknown pilot was, Jake had complete confidence in his own abilities and those of his wingman. The F-22 was the pinnacle of fighter aircraft technology, and he had been trained by the best instructors in the world. No matter how good this mystery pilot was, Jake was determined to force them to land. The pursuit continued for nearly 20 minutes, winding through some of the most spectacular and dangerous terrain in Nevada. The unknown aircraft seemed to know the area intimately, threading through passages that barely had room for its wingspan and using every geographic feature to try to lose its pursuers. Jake was beginning to wonder if they were dealing with some kind of test pilot flying a classified prototype when the situation took another unexpected turn. "Viper Flight, this is Hammer Lead. We're moving to assist with your intercept." Jake's heart sank as he heard the transmission. Hammer Flight was another pair of F-22s based at Nellis, and their call sign meant that the situation had been escalated to a much higher level. The arrival of additional aircraft meant that someone in command was taking this incursion very seriously indeed. "Copy. Hammer Lead. Unknown aircraft is currently in the Blackstone Canyon system, heading southwest at high speed." Within minutes, Jake could see two more F-22s approaching from the north. Hammer Lead was Captain Rick Thompson, a pilot with over 15 years of experience and a reputation for being completely by the book. If Rick was involved, it meant that this situation had the attention of some very senior people. Now there were 4 F-22 Raptors pursuing one unknown aircraft through the Nevada desert. It should have been over quickly. No single aircraft could evade 4 of the world's most advanced fighters. But the mysterious pilot continued to demonstrate an almost supernatural ability to stay ahead of them. "This is getting ridiculous," Rick Thompson's voice came over the radio. "How is one aircraft staying ahead of 4 F-22s? It was a valid question, and one that Jake was asking himself. The unknown aircraft was obviously fast and maneuverable, but it shouldn't have been able to maintain its lead against the combined efforts of 4 Raptor pilots. The answer came as they emerged from another canyon, and the mystery aircraft suddenly climbed almost vertically, pulling G-forces that would have killed an ordinary pilot. At the top of the climb, it executed a perfect Herbst maneuver, a post-stall turn that allowed it to reverse direction completely while barely losing any altitude. "Did you see that?" Sarah's voice was filled with amazement and concern. Jake had seen it, and he didn't believe it. The maneuver the unknown aircraft had just performed was theoretically possible, but it required a level of pilot skill and aircraft performance that bordered on the impossible. Worse, it put the mystery aircraft in a position where it could potentially engage them rather than simply evade. "All aircraft, maintain defensive posture," Rick Thompson ordered. "This pilot is definitely hostile." But even as the words left his mouth, the unknown aircraft did something that changed everything. Instead of taking advantage of its superior position to attack, it transmitted a single brief radio signal. The transmission lasted only a few seconds, but it was enough to identify the aircraft's call sign, and when Jake heard it, his blood turned to ice. "Ghost Rider!" The name hung in the air like a physical presence, and suddenly everything made sense. Ghost Rider wasn't just any pilot, it was a legend. A myth that had grown up around a mysterious aviator who had never been seen, but whose exploits were whispered about in pilot training schools and officers' clubs around the world. Jake had heard the stories, of course. Every military pilot had. Ghost Rider was supposedly an American pilot of incredible skill who operated outside normal command structures, appearing only when the most dangerous missions required someone with abilities beyond those of ordinary pilots. Most people dismissed the stories as fiction, the kind of legends that grew up around any elite military unit. But now, hearing that call sign transmitted from an aircraft that had just outflown 4 F-22 Raptors, Jake realized that the legend might be real after all. And if Ghost Rider was real, then everything he had been told about this intercept mission was wrong. The 4 F-22s hung in formation, waiting for orders that didn't come. On the ground, Jake knew that radio operators and commanders were frantically checking databases and making phone calls, trying to verify what they had just heard. The unknown aircraft, Ghost Rider's aircraft, maintained its position about 2 miles away, neither advancing nor retreating. It was as if the pilot was waiting for something, giving the command structure time to sort things out. Jake found himself staring at the mysterious black aircraft, trying to understand what was happening. If the stories were true, Ghost Rider was one of their own, an American pilot flying American missions. But why the secrecy? Why the lack of identification? And why was this pilot operating in restricted airspace without proper authorization? The radio crackled to life, breaking the tense silence. "All aircraft, this is Control. Maintain current positions pending further orders." Jake exchanged glances with Sarah's aircraft, knowing that she was probably as confused as he was. In all his years of training and operational flying, he had never encountered a situation like this one. They had been ordered to intercept an intruder, only to discover that the intruder might be one of their own people operating under some kind of special authorization. As the minutes ticked by, Jake found himself studying the unknown aircraft more closely. Now that he wasn't focused on the chase, he could appreciate the elegant lines of its design. It was clearly built for stealth and speed, with features that suggested technology even more advanced than his own F-22. Whoever had built this aircraft had access to cutting-edge aerospace technology and unlimited funding. That strongly suggested a government program, probably one so classified that most military personnel wouldn't even know it existed. The radio came alive again, but this time it wasn't Control speaking. It was a voice Jake didn't recognize, calm and professional, with just a hint of an accent he couldn't place. Viper Flight, Hammer Flight, this is Ghost Rider. I apologize for the confusion. My mission parameters required me to test your response times and intercept capabilities. You performed admirably. Jake felt his anger rising. They had been used as test subjects, put through their paces by someone who had been evaluating their performance without their knowledge or consent. It was a violation of every principle of military cooperation and trust. But before he could respond, Ghost Rider continued. I'm transmitting authentication codes now. Your controllers will verify my authorization shortly. Jake watched his communication display as a series of encrypted codes flashed across the screen. Whatever those codes contained, they would either confirm Ghost Rider's story or prove that they were dealing with an enemy agent of incredible sophistication. The wait seemed to last forever, though it was probably only a few minutes. Finally, control came back on the air, and the tension in the operator's voice was unmistakable. All aircraft, authentication confirmed. Ghost Rider is authorized for this operation. Resume normal patrol duties. Jake couldn't believe what he was hearing. After a 20-minute high-speed chase through some of the most dangerous terrain in Nevada, they were simply being told to go home as if nothing had happened. No explanation, no debriefing, just orders to resume normal duties. Control, this is Viper 1. Request clarification on... Negative, Viper 1. No further information available. Return to base immediately. The finality in Control's voice made it clear that no amount of arguing would get them the answers they wanted. Jake looked over at the mysterious black aircraft one more time, hoping to get some final glimpse of the pilot who had just outflown 4 of the Air Force's best. But Ghost Rider had other plans. Even as Jake watched, the aircraft accelerated away from them at a speed that defied belief, climbing rapidly until it disappeared into the clear blue sky above. Within seconds, it was gone, leaving only the 4 F-22s hanging in the desert air. Well, Sarah's voice came over the radio. That was definitely not in the training manual. Jake had to agree. In all his years of flying, he had never encountered anything like what had just happened. He had been outflown by a pilot of incredible skill, flying an aircraft that represented technology he could barely comprehend, and the whole encounter had been dismissed by his superiors as if it were nothing more than a routine training exercise. As they flew back toward Nellis, Jake found himself replaying every moment of the encounter. Ghost Rider had demonstrated flying skills that bordered on the supernatural, combined with an intimate knowledge of military tactics and procedures. Whoever this pilot was, they represented a level of capability that Jake had never seen before. But more than that, the encounter had raised questions that Jake knew would haunt him for a long time to come. Who was Ghost Rider really? What kind of missions required that level of secrecy and sophistication? And why had they been chosen as unwitting test subjects? The answers, Jake suspected, were buried so deep in the classified world that he would never find them. But one thing was certain. His routine training flight had turned into something extraordinary, an encounter with a legend that most pilots would never believe if he told them about it. As Nellis Air Force Base came into view ahead of them, Jake made a mental note to do some research when he got back to the ground. Ghost Rider might be a legend, but legends had to start somewhere. And after what he had just experienced, Jake was determined to find out where this particular legend had begun. Back on the ground at Nellis Air Force Base, Jake Morrison felt like a man walking through a strange dream. The debriefing had been unlike anything he had ever experienced in his military career. Instead of the usual detailed questioning about every aspect of the encounter, he and the other pilots had been told simply to file standard incident reports and forget about what they had seen. Forget about it? Sarah Chen shook her head as they walked away from the debriefing room. How exactly are we supposed to forget about a pilot who made our F-22s look like training aircraft? Jake understood her frustration. They were among the best pilots in the Air Force, flying the most advanced fighter jets ever built. The idea that someone could outfly them so completely was almost impossible to accept, yet they had all witnessed it firsthand. "Maybe we're not supposed to forget," Jake said quietly. "Maybe we're supposed to pretend we forgot." Sarah stopped walking and stared at him. "What do you mean?" "Think about it. Authentication codes that cleared instantly at the highest levels. An aircraft with technology that's obviously years ahead of anything we've seen. A pilot with skills that defy explanation. This whole thing has Black Project written all over it." They walked in silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. Jake had been involved in classified programs before, but nothing like this. The level of secrecy surrounding Ghost Rider suggested something far beyond even the most sensitive projects he had encountered. That evening, Jake found himself in his quarters, staring at his laptop screen. Officially, he was writing his incident report. Unofficially, he was trying to find any trace of information about Ghost Rider in the databases he had access to. The results were frustrating. Every search came up empty, as if the call sign had been scrubbed from all official records. There were no pilot profiles, no mission reports, no training records, nothing that would indicate Ghost Rider had ever existed. But Jake was persistent, and he knew how to dig deeper than most people. Years of military service had taught him that information rarely disappeared completely. It just got buried where ordinary searches couldn't find it. He started looking for indirect references, mentions in other pilots' reports that might have escaped the censors. He searched for unusual aircraft sightings, unexplained radar contacts, anything that might give him a clue about Ghost Rider's activities. Slowly, a pattern began to emerge. There were scattered reports from bases around the world, always carefully worded and buried in routine paperwork. A mysterious aircraft seen over the Persian Gulf during a training exercise. An unidentified pilot who had provided air support during a classified mission in Afghanistan. A black aircraft that had appeared without warning during a NATO exercise in Europe, demonstrated impossible flying capabilities, and then vanished. None of the reports mentioned Ghost Rider by name, but the descriptions were remarkably consistent. A single pilot, flying an aircraft of unknown type, demonstrating skills that bordered on the supernatural. Always appearing when least expected, always disappearing before anyone could get a clear look. Jake leaned back in his chair, trying to process what he was learning. The evidence suggested that Ghost Rider had been operating for years, possibly decades, conducting missions that were so classified that even their existence was denied. His computer chimed with an incoming message. Jake expected it to be routine administrative traffic, but when he opened it, he found something that made his heart race. The message was brief and unsigned. "Conference Room C, Building 1247, 0200 hours. Come alone." Jake stared at the screen, his mind racing. Building 1247 was in a part of the base that most personnel never saw, where the most sensitive briefings took place. Someone wanted to meet with him about Ghost Rider. That was the only explanation that made sense. He glanced at his watch. It was nearly midnight now, which gave him 2 hours to decide whether to take the risk. Meeting unknown contacts in secure areas was against every security protocol he had ever learned. But the encounter with Ghost Rider had already taken him far beyond normal protocols. At exactly 0200 hours, Jake found himself standing outside Conference Room C. The corridor was dimly lit and completely empty, which was unusual for any building on the base. Usually there was at least a security guard or duty officer somewhere in sight. Jake knocked softly on the door and waited. After a moment, he heard footsteps approaching from inside, and the door opened to reveal a woman he had never seen before. She was tall and athletic, with short dark hair and the kind of bearing that spoke of military training. But what caught Jake's attention immediately were her eyes. They were the coldest, most intelligent eyes he had ever seen, like looking into the mind of a predator. "Captain Morrison," she said in a voice that was calm and professional. Please come in. Jake stepped into the room, noting automatically that there were no windows and only one exit. The woman closed the door behind him and gestured toward a chair at a small conference table. Please sit down. We have a great deal to discuss. Jake remained standing. Who are you? And how do you know about what happened today? The woman smiled, but it was a cold expression that didn't reach her eyes. I know about what happened today because I was there. My name is Colonel Alexandra Stone, but most people know me by my call sign. Jake felt the blood drain from his face. Ghost Rider. That's right, Captain. I'm the pilot who gave you and your wingman such an interesting morning. Jake stared at her, trying to reconcile the woman standing before him with the supernatural flying skills he had witnessed. She looked ordinary enough, attractive, but not remarkable, the kind of person who would blend into any crowd. But there was something in her posture, something in the way she held herself, that suggested coiled power. You're wondering how a relatively normal-looking woman could outfly 4 F-22 Raptors, Colonel Stone said, as if reading his thoughts. The answer is simple: training, technology, and a very specific set of circumstances that I'll explain in due time. Jake finally sat down, his mind struggling to process this revelation. Why are you telling me this? Why reveal yourself at all? Colonel Stone took the seat across from him, and Jake noticed that she positioned herself where she could see the door while keeping her hands free. Even in a secure briefing room, she maintained combat awareness. Because, Captain Morrison, your performance this morning impressed me. More importantly, it impressed some very senior people who have been watching your career with interest. What kind of interest? The kind that could change your life completely, Stone replied. How much do you know about special access programs, Captain? Jake considered his answer carefully. I know they exist. I know they're highly classified. And I know that most people who work on them can never talk about what they do. That's a good start. What I'm about to tell you is covered by security classifications that go beyond anything you've encountered before. If you decide to hear what I have to say, there will be no going back to your old life. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. He had always known that there were levels of military operation that existed beyond the normal chain of command, but he had never expected to be directly confronted with them. And if I decide I don't want to hear it? Colonel Stone's expression didn't change. Then you'll walk out of this room, return to your quarters, and continue your career as a very competent F-22 pilot. What happened this morning will become just another strange story that you'll tell in officers' clubs for the rest of your life. Jake sat in silence for a long moment, weighing his options. He could walk away right now and return to the comfortable certainty of his normal life. But he knew that he would spend the rest of his career wondering what he had turned down. Tell me, he said finally. Colonel Stone nodded, as if she had expected that answer. The program I work for doesn't officially exist. We have no name, no budget that appears in any congressional report, and no oversight from any conventional military authority. We answer directly to a select group of people at the highest levels of government, and our missions are things that cannot be accomplished through normal military channels. What kind of missions? The kind that require pilots with abilities beyond those of conventional military aviators. The kind that involve aircraft with capabilities that officially don't exist. The kind that happen in places where the United States military is not supposed to be operating. Jake leaned forward, his curiosity overriding his caution. And you think I qualify for this program? I think you have potential, Stone replied. Your flying skills are excellent, but more importantly, you demonstrated something this morning that can't be taught in any flight school. Which was? You kept flying. When faced with an aircraft that could obviously outperform your F-22, when confronted with a pilot who was clearly superior to anything you had encountered before, you didn't give up. You adapted your tactics, you stayed focused on the mission, and you never stopped trying to find a way to succeed. Jake thought back to the morning's encounter. I was just doing my job. No, Captain. You were doing much more than your job. You were demonstrating the kind of mental flexibility and determination that we look for in our pilots. Most people, when confronted with something beyond their experience, either panic or give up. You did neither. Colonel Stone stood up and moved to a wall display that Jake hadn't noticed before. With the touch of a button, she activated a screen that showed detailed schematics of an aircraft unlike anything Jake had ever seen. "This is what I was flying this morning," she said. "Officially, it doesn't exist. Unofficially, it represents about 15 years of development by some of the most brilliant aerospace engineers in the world." Jake stared at the schematics, trying to understand what he was seeing. The aircraft was clearly designed for stealth and speed, but it incorporated technologies that seemed almost alien. The engines appeared to be some kind of hybrid design, combining traditional jet propulsion with systems he couldn't identify. "How is this possible?" he asked. "What do you know about the Aurora project, Captain?" Jake frowned. "I've heard rumors. Supposed to be some kind of hypersonic reconnaissance aircraft. Most people think it's just an urban legend." "Aurora was real," Stone said. "But it was just the beginning. What you're looking at is the result of decades of development that began with Aurora and went in directions that most people couldn't imagine." She touched another control, and the display changed to show performance specifications that made Jake's eyes widen. The aircraft was capable of speeds that approached Mach 6, with a ceiling of over 100,000 feet. Its stealth characteristics were so advanced that it could operate virtually undetected by any known radar system. "And you fly this thing regularly?" Jake asked. "I helped design it," Stone replied. "The program needed pilots who could also serve as test pilots and systems developers. We couldn't trust the development of such advanced technology to conventional procurement channels." Jake was beginning to understand the scope of what he was being shown. This wasn't just a classified aircraft program, it was an entire shadow military structure that operated completely outside normal channels. "How many people know about this? Including you? Maybe 50 people worldwide, and most of them don't know everything you're seeing now." The weight of that revelation settled on Jake like a physical burden. He was being shown secrets that could reshape his understanding of his own country's military capabilities. "Why me?" he asked. "There have to be hundreds of pilots with qualifications similar to mine." Colonel Stone returned to her seat and studied him for a long moment before answering. "Because, Captain Morrison, you have something that can't be taught and can't be faked. You have integrity." "I don't understand." "The program I'm offering you access to operates with minimal oversight and maximum autonomy. Our pilots have access to technology and capabilities that could easily be misused by someone with the wrong motivations. We need people who can be trusted with that kind of power." Stone activated another display, this one showing what appeared to be mission reports. Jake could see references to operations in countries he couldn't identify, targets that weren't described in detail, and results that were measured in ways he didn't understand. "Some of our missions involve eliminating threats that conventional military forces can't touch," Stone continued. "We hunt down terrorists who operate beyond the reach of normal law enforcement. We gather intelligence from places where sending conventional assets would cause international incidents. We prevent catastrophes that the public never hears about." Jake studied the mission reports, trying to understand the implications of what he was being told. "Are you offering me a job?" "I'm offering you a chance to make a real difference in ways that most military personnel never can. But I'm also offering you a life of secrecy, isolation, and moral ambiguity that not everyone can handle." The room fell silent as Jake considered his options. On one hand, he was being offered access to the most advanced military technology in the world and the chance to serve his country in ways that few people ever could. On the other hand, He would be stepping into a world where normal rules didn't apply and where the consequences of failure could be catastrophic. "What would I have to give up?" he asked finally. "Your old life," Stone replied without hesitation. "Your current assignment, your friends, most of your family relationships. You would become someone else, with a cover story and a background that could withstand investigation by hostile intelligence services." Jake thought about Sarah and the other pilots he had served with. He thought about the comfortable routine of his life at Nellis and the clear chain of command that had always defined his military service. "How long do I have to decide?" Colonel Stone glanced at her watch. "About 6 hours. If you accept, you'll be transferred out of Nellis this afternoon on orders that will take you to a training facility that doesn't appear on any official maps. If you decline, we'll never have this conversation again." She stood up and moved toward the door, then paused and looked back at him. "One last thing, Captain. If you accept this assignment, you'll discover that everything you thought you knew about air combat was just the beginning. The aircraft I flew this morning represents technology that's 5 years old by our standards. What we're developing now would seem like magic to most people." With that, Colonel Stone left the room, leaving Jake alone with the most important decision of his life. He sat in the empty conference room for a long time, staring at the displays that showed technology beyond his imagination. Part of him wanted to walk away, to return to the simple certainty of his old life, but a larger part of him was already making preparations for a journey into a world where legends were real and the impossible was just another day at work. Captain Jake Morrison found himself standing at the edge of a runway that didn't exist on any official map, watching the most extraordinary aircraft he had ever seen prepare for takeoff. 3 months had passed since his fateful encounter with Colonel Alexandra Stone, and his life had been completely transformed. The training facility, known simply as the Ranch to those who worked there, was located in a remote valley in the mountains of Colorado. From the air, it appeared to be nothing more than an abandoned mining operation. But beneath the carefully maintained facade lay one of the most advanced aerospace development centers in the world. Jake had spent his first weeks at the ranch undergoing psychological evaluation, security clearance processing, and intensive briefings on the true nature of America's most classified military programs. What he learned had shattered every assumption he had ever made about his country's defense capabilities. The program that Colonel Stone represented was called Project Wraith, and it had been operating for over 20 years. Its mission was simple in concept but staggering in scope: to develop and deploy aerospace capabilities that could counter threats conventional military forces couldn't handle. "Ready for your first solo flight, Captain?" Colonel Stone's voice came through his headset as Jake performed his pre-flight checks. Jake looked across the cockpit of the aircraft he would be flying, still barely believing that such technology was possible. The F-22 Phantom was the latest evolution of the aircraft Stone had flown during their first encounter. Where her aircraft had been impressive, this one was revolutionary. The Phantom incorporated technologies that seemed to defy the laws of physics. Its engines could transition seamlessly from conventional jet propulsion to a form of scramjet operation that allowed speeds approaching Mach 8. Its stealth capabilities were so advanced that it could literally become invisible to all known detection methods. And its flight control systems utilized artificial intelligence that made it responsive to the pilot's thoughts as much as their physical inputs. "As ready as anyone can be for something like this," Jake replied, running through the checklist one final time. The transformation from his old life had been difficult but necessary. Officially, Captain Jake Morrison had been killed in a training accident 3 months ago. His family had been told he died in a classified mission, and they had been compensated accordingly. The man who now sat in the cockpit of the most advanced aircraft ever built was someone else entirely. Someone with a new identity, a new history, and a new purpose. "Remember," Stone's voice continued. "The Phantom will try to anticipate your intentions. Don't fight the aircraft, work with it. Think of it as a partner rather than a machine." Jake engaged the engines and felt power unlike anything he had ever experienced. The Phantom seemed to come alive around him, its systems integrating with his thoughts and movements in ways that felt almost supernatural. As he taxied toward the runway, the aircraft's AI began providing him with information about weather conditions, airspace status, and optimal flight paths without him having to ask. "Phantom 1, you are cleared for takeoff. Enjoy the ride." Jake pushed the throttles forward and experienced acceleration that defied belief. The Phantom leaped into the air with a grace that made his old F-22 seem clumsy by comparison. Within seconds, he was climbing at an impossible rate toward an altitude that would have required a spacesuit in any conventional aircraft. But the Phantom's environmental systems were as advanced as everything else about it. Jake found himself comfortable and alert at 80,000 feet, looking down at the curvature of the Earth while the aircraft's AI guided him through a series of maneuvers designed to demonstrate its capabilities. The experience was intoxicating. The Phantom responded to his intentions as if it were an extension of his own body. When he thought about turning, it turned. When he wanted to climb, it climbed. The boundary between pilot and aircraft seemed to dissolve entirely. "How does it feel?" Stone's voice came through the radio. "Like flying a dream," Jake replied honestly. "How is this even possible?" 15 years of development by the best minds in aerospace engineering, combined with technologies that we acquired from some very unusual sources. Jake was about to ask what she meant by that when his attention was captured by an alert from the aircraft's threat detection system. Something was approaching from the east, moving at high speed and high altitude. "Colonel, I'm showing an unknown contact bearing 090, Angel 75. There was a pause before Stone replied, and when she did, her tone had changed completely. "Jake, you need to return to base immediately. That contact is not part of today's training exercise." Jake checked his displays more carefully and felt his blood run cold. The approaching aircraft was traveling at Mach 4 and climbing, which meant it had capabilities similar to his own Phantom. But according to his briefings, there were only 3 Phantom aircraft in existence, and one of them was in maintenance. "Colonel, what exactly am I looking at here?" "Something that shouldn't exist," Stone replied grimly. "Execute emergency return procedures now." Jake banked toward home, but the unknown aircraft adjusted its course to intercept him. Whatever was flying, that aircraft knew exactly where he was and what he was doing, despite the Phantom's advanced stealth systems. "Contact is still closing. ETA to intercept in 4 minutes. Jake had been trained for this scenario during his months at the ranch. Project Wraith had always known that eventually, other nations would develop similar technologies. The question had never been if, but when. "Jake, listen to me carefully." Stone's voice was calm but urgent. "The aircraft pursuing you is based on stolen Wraith technology. We've been tracking the development for 2 years, but this is the first time they've deployed it operationally." "Who's they?" "That's classified above your current level. What matters right now is that you cannot allow that aircraft to force you down. The technology in your Phantom must not fall into hostile hands under any circumstances." Jake understood the implications immediately. He was carrying secrets that could shift the global balance of power. If the pursuing aircraft succeeded in forcing him down, the consequences could be catastrophic. The Phantom's AI began providing tactical options, displaying potential escape routes and evasion maneuvers on Jake's heads-up display. But as he studied the options, Jake realized that the pursuing aircraft had positioned itself perfectly to cut off every avenue of escape. "Colonel, I think we're dealing with someone who knows our capabilities very well." "That's because they should," Stone replied bitterly. "The pilot pursuing you is Major Elena Volkov, formerly of the Russian Air Force. She was recruited by our program 4 years ago, but disappeared during a classified mission 6 months later. Jake felt a chill that had nothing to do with the thin air at 80,000 feet. She's one of us? She was. Now she's flying for whoever paid her enough to betray everything she swore to protect. The tactical situation was becoming desperate. Volkov's aircraft was faster than Jake had expected, and she was demonstrating flying skills that rivaled Stone's own abilities. Worse, she seemed to know the Phantom's capabilities and limitations better than Jake did himself. "Jake, you need to do something that goes against every instinct you have as a pilot," Stone said. "You need to let the Phantom take control." "What do you mean?" "The AI in your aircraft is capable of autonomous operation in emergency situations. It can fly the aircraft better than any human pilot, but only if you surrender conscious control completely." Jake had heard about the Phantom's AI capabilities, but he had never been trained to use them. The idea of giving control of his aircraft to a computer went against everything he had been taught as a pilot. "How do I do it?" "There's a red switch on your left console labeled Autonomous Override. Flip it, and then clear your mind of all conscious thought about flying. Let the AI read your intentions without interference from your analytical mind." Jake found the switch and hesitated. Once he flipped it, he would be trusting his life to artificial intelligence that he didn't fully understand. But with Volkov closing rapidly and conventional evasion maneuvers failing, he had no choice. He flipped the switch. The change was immediate and overwhelming. Jake felt the Phantom's AI integrate with his consciousness in ways he hadn't imagined possible. Suddenly, he could sense the aircraft's systems as if they were part of his own body. He knew exactly where Volkov's aircraft was without looking at his displays. He could feel the air currents and atmospheric conditions around him as physical sensations. And then, the Phantom began to fly. What followed was a display of aeronautical skill that defied human comprehension. The AI guided the aircraft through maneuvers that would have been impossible for any human pilot to conceive, much less execute. The Phantom twisted and turned through three-dimensional space like a living thing, using every principle of physics to its advantage. Volkov tried to follow, and Jake had to admire her skill as she managed to stay with them through several impossible maneuvers. But the AI was learning from each of her moves, predicting her responses, and adapting its tactics in real time. "How are you doing that?" Volkov's voice came over the radio, speaking English with a slight Russian accent. Jake found himself responding without conscious thought, as if the AI was guiding his words as well as his aircraft. "Hello, Elena. Alexandra Stone sends her regards." There was a long pause before Volkov replied. "You cannot escape, American. My aircraft has capabilities you have not seen." "Then show me." What Volkov showed him was the reason Project Wraith existed. Her aircraft suddenly accelerated beyond anything Jake thought possible, climbing to an altitude where even the Phantom's environmental systems were strained. She was flying technology that was clearly beyond anything the American program had developed. But the Phantom's AI was unimpressed. It simply adjusted its flight path and began using the thin atmosphere at extreme altitude to its advantage, performing maneuvers that used the edge of space itself as a tactical environment. "Jake, you need to end this now," Stone's voice came through the radio. "Volkov's aircraft is powered by technology we can't match in a sustained pursuit, but you have something she doesn't. Which is? The courage to do what's necessary." Jake understood what Stone was telling him. The Phantom carried weapon systems that he had been briefed on but had never used. They were designed for exactly this kind of situation, eliminating threats that conventional military forces couldn't handle. "Elena," Jake called over the radio, "last chance. Surrender now and we can work something out." Volkov's laughter was cold and bitter. "I know what your people do to traitors, American. I prefer to take my chances in the air." The AI provided Jake with targeting information. showing him exactly how to engage Volkov's aircraft with weapons that would leave no trace of what had happened. At this altitude, any debris would burn up on re-entry, leaving no evidence that either aircraft had ever existed. "I'm sorry," Jake said softly, and engaged the weapons system. The engagement lasted only seconds. Volkov's aircraft simply vanished in a brief flash of light that was invisible from the ground 80,000 feet below. The Phantom's AI confirmed that the threat had been eliminated and began guiding them home. As they descended toward the ranch, Jake found himself struggling with what had just happened. He had just killed another pilot, someone who had once served the same cause he now served. The reality of what Project Wraith actually did was beginning to sink in. "You did what was necessary," Stone's voice came through his headset, as if she could sense his thoughts. "Is it always like this?" Jake asked. "No," Stone replied. "Sometimes it's much worse." They landed at the ranch as the sun was setting, painting the mountains in shades of red and gold. As Jake climbed out of the Phantom, he felt as if he were stepping out of one life and into another. Colonel Stone was waiting for him on the tarmac, and for the first time since he had met her, she looked almost vulnerable. "Elena was my student," she said quietly. "I taught her everything she knew about flying. When she disappeared, I hoped she was dead. It would have been kinder." Jake understood. In the world they operated in, betrayal was worse than death because it endangered everyone who had trusted you. "How many others like her are out there?" he asked. Stone looked up at the darkening sky, where other aircraft might be flying missions that would never appear in any official record. "More than we'd like," she said. "And that's why we need pilots like you. The world is becoming more dangerous, and the threats are becoming more sophisticated. We're the only thing standing between civilization and chaos." As they walked toward the debriefing facility, Jake realized that his transformation was complete. He was no longer the F-22 pilot who had been outflown over the Nevada desert 3 months ago. He was something else entirely, a guardian of secrets that most people couldn't imagine, flying missions that officially never happened, protecting a world that would never know his name. And somehow, despite the moral complexity and the terrible weight of responsibility, he wouldn't have it any other way, because someone had to do this job, and he had discovered that he was uniquely qualified for it. The legend of Ghost Rider was real, and now Jake Morrison was part of that legend, flying in skies that few people would ever see, fighting battles that would never be recorded, and protecting a future that hung in the balance every single day. As they reached the building, Stone paused and looked back at the Phantom, which was already being serviced for its next mission. "Welcome to the real war, Captain," she said. "I hope you're ready for what comes next." Jake looked at the aircraft that had become an extension of his own will, thinking about the challenges that lay ahead. Whatever came next, he knew that he and the other pilots of Project Wraith would be ready to meet it. Because in a world where the impossible had become routine, someone had to guard the Guardians, and sometimes that someone had to be willing to become a legend.